morning sun spilled over Dustwater, a small town on the edge of nowhere, where gossip traveled faster than the prairie wind, and cruelty dressed itself as laughter. And on that day the laughter was loudest at the sight of Clara May, a young woman with her shoulders hunched and her eyes fixed to the ground, as the townsfolk circled her like vultures, spitting words sharper than any blade, mocking her for the child she carried without a wedding band, for the man who had promised her forever then left her with nothing but a growing belly and the taste of shame. And though she clutched her faded shawl tighter around herself, hoping to vanish, their voices clawed into her. "Trash," they sneered. "No decent man will have her now." Until their laughter rose like a storm and Clara stumbled through the street, with her cheeks burning, her heart breaking, her dignity shredded before their eyes. And though she tried to hold herself steady, her legs gave way and she crumpled at the edge of the boardwalk, sobs racking her body as the jeers carried on. But what no one noticed, not yet, was the lone rider tethering his horse at the far end of town, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with dust on his hat and fire in his eyes, James Callahan, a man who had seen enough cruelty in his life to recognize when it was being poured on someone who deserved none of it. And as he stepped into the street, his boots striking the ground with purpose, silence began to ripple through the crowd, for there was something about the way he carried himself, a weight of storms weathered and battles fought, that made even the cruelest tongues falter. And without a word he moved to Clara, kneeling beside her, his hand gentle as he helped her to her feet, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Ain't a thing wrong with you, miss." Not a damn thing. And before she could protest, before the crowd could reclaim its laughter, James turned, sweeping his gaze across them all, his voice rising like thunder. "You think shame belongs to her? Shame belongs to the man who left her. Shame belongs to every one of you who spits on a woman instead of standing by her side," his words striking like hammers until even the boldest gossips shrank back. But James wasn't finished, not by half, for he stepped into the center of the street, drawing Clara with him, his arm steady around her shoulders, and in a voice that carried to every corner of Dustwater, he declared, "You mock her for not wearing a ring? Then I'll fix that right here and now," and pulling the simple silver band that had once belonged to his mother from his pocket. "Miss Clara May, will you take my hand, here in front of God and every soul that dares mock you, and let me be your husband?" And the gasp that rose from the crowd was a living thing, mouths falling open, whispers colliding, while Clara, her tears still fresh, her lips trembling, looked up at him in disbelief, whispering, why me?" And James, unshaken, answered with the kind of truth that silences doubt. "Because you deserve more than their laughter, Clara. You deserve a life where no one can touch you with scorn again, and I'll stand in that fire with you if you'll let me." And though fear warred with hope in her heart, though her shame screamed that she was unworthy, something in his eyes broke through, something unmovable, and with trembling lips she whispered, "Yes." And the moment the word left her mouth, James slipped the ring onto her finger, straightened tall in the street, and pulled her into his side as he declared, "Then she ain't yours to laugh at no more, she's my wife." And the silence that fell over Dustwater was heavy as stone, broken only by the distant creak of a sign in the wind. For in that moment shame had been burned away by defiance, and Clara May, who had been cast aside, now stood married in the open street, with a cowboy at her side who feared no tongue, no man, no law but his own. The vows had been spoken without priest or paper, but the weight of them clung to Clara May's heart heavier than iron, for though James Callahan had taken her hand in front of the town and shielded her with words that struck like gunfire, she could not shake the feeling that she was unworthy of the ring now, sitting on her trembling finger. And as he led her from the gawking crowd toward his waiting horse, she felt every eye sear into her back, half in shock, half in mockery, whispers already spinning through the air like dust devils. "He don't know what he's taken in. She trapped him. It won't last." But James walked steady, unflinching, his jaw set like stone. And when they reached his horse, he didn't give her time to sink back into shame. He lifted her gently into the saddle, swung up behind her, and with a sharp click of his tongue sent the animal into motion, leaving the muttering behind them as the town shrank to a blur of false smiles and bitter tongues. Yet though the wind rushed against her face and the sound of hoofbeats filled her ears, Clara couldn't silence the storm inside her, the voice that whispered she had let herself be used, that a man like James couldn't truly want her, not broken as she was, not carrying the weight of another man's child. And when they reached the crest of the hill overlooking his spread, a ranch sprawling wide with cattle grazing and fences, stretched long against the horizon, she felt her heart tighten. For this was no shack, no lonely outpost. This was the home of a man who'd built something worth pride, and she whispered with tears stinging her eyes, "I don't belong here, James." But he only looked at her, his eyes steady as always, and answered, "You belong wherever a man's willing to fight to keep you safe. And that's here," his voice final as a judge's gavel, though still gentle, though still carrying something she couldn't name. And when he helped her down, his hand lingered a moment, longer than necessary, as if to remind her he wouldn't let go, not now, not after he had made his vow before the town. And as he showed her inside, into a home that smelled of cedar and earth, walls lined with shelves and worn furniture that bore the marks of a life lived hard but honest, Clara felt a strange mixture of comfort and dread. Because while the space felt safe, she knew safety was a fragile thing, and she couldn't yet trust it would last. But James, with the same steady resolve he'd shown in the street, simply said, "This is yours now too," and set about kindling a fire, cooking a simple meal, speaking not of pity but of plans, how there was work to be done on the ranch, how she'd need rest soon with the child coming, how he'd build her a proper room when she was ready. And, though she listened in silence, part of her heart aching to believe him, another part feared the day he would wake, see her for what she was, and regret ever raising his hand in that street. For shame does not die in a single hour, it lingers like smoke. But as night fell and she lay awake in the small bed he'd given her, listening to the sounds of his boots pacing softly outside the door, guarding her as if from ghosts, she realized that James Callahan was not a man of empty words, and if he had chosen to stand beside her in front of the town, he meant to stand beside her in every storm that would come. Though Clara, broken and weary, still wondered if her own heart could bear the weight of such a vow, and whether love, real love, could ever bloom from the ashes of her shame. The days that followed were not gentle. For though James had spoken his vows, and though he had carried Clara into his home with the steadiness of a man who knew his heart, the town was not so easily silenced, and their tongues wagged with venom sharper than knives, every whispered insult finding its way to Clara's ears when she rode into town for flour, or when she passed the women at the well who turned their backs and muttered words like harlot and shame as though she weren't standing within earshot. And though she tried to keep her chin high, tried to remind herself of James's promise and the ring that now bound her to him, inside she felt herself cracking, the old wounds bleeding again, the memory of cruel laughter chasing her down every street until she longed to vanish into the prairie. Yet James, seeing the weariness in her eyes though she never spoke it, did not scold nor demand she toughen up. He simply tightened his hold, not with words but with acts, taking her hand when others stared, placing his arm around her in the mercantile, paying no mind to the judgment of men whose hands were empty and hearts cruel. And it was in those moments Clara began to see the truth of him, that James Callahan was not fighting the town for honor's sake but for her, because he believed she was worth defending. Yet still her doubts gnawed at her, whispering she would drag him down until the night came, when a group of men, bitter and half-drunk, blocked their path outside the saloon, their words a sneer. "That your wife, Callahan? Thought you had better taste." And Clara froze, her shame blazing like fire, ready for James to deny her or walk away. But instead he stepped forward, his body shielding hers, and with a voice that rang through the dark street he said, "That's my wife, and you'll speak her name with respect or not at all." And though fists flew and dust rose as James fought them back, Clara's tears fell not from fear but from awe, for she saw a man who would bleed for her without hesitation. And when he stood bruised but unbroken, pulling her into his arms with hands still trembling, she whispered through sobs, "Why do you keep fighting for me?" And his answer, ragged but steady, struck deeper than any vow. "Because you were worth it long before they made you doubt it, Clara May." And in that moment, with his heart laid bare in the dirt and blood of the street, Clara realized that the shame she had carried all her life was not hers to hold. It had been forced upon her, and here stood a man willing to carry it away if only she let him. And though the road ahead would still be hard, though the town's scorn would not vanish overnight, something inside her shifted, fragile as dawn, the first hint of belief that maybe, just maybe, she could belong, not as an outcast mocked in the street, but as a wife loved openly, fiercely, in front of God and every sneering soul who thought her unworthy. And as James led her home, his hand never letting go of hers, Clara knew the fight was not over. But neither was she alone in it anymore.